Hi, I'm Rohan Mandvi,
And I'm Nick Desmond.
and today we're going to talk to you about
The social
trap. Now I know what you're thinking. What is a social trap?
A social trap is a situation in which conflicting parties, by each rationally pursuing their own self-interest rather than the good of the group, become caught in mutually destructive behavior. In other words, it's when people do things for the short-term individual gains, which in the long run leads to a loss for the group as a whole.
The term social trap was first introduced to the scientific community by John Platt's 1973 paper in American Psychologist. He developed this idea to give an explanation for the famous example of the tragedy of the commons. The tragedy of the commons is the oldest example of a social trap in which people in England and Ireland shared certain fields or commons to grow food and cattle. But the overproduction of food caused the land to become infertile and destroyed. The short-term gain was gaining food, but the long-term effect it had was causing the land to be unusable. John Platt then coined this as a social trap. By applying the findings of basic research on schedules of operant reinforcement, Platt recognized that individuals operating for short-term positive gain, or reinforcement, had a tendency to overexploit a resource, which led to long-term overall loss to society.
An example of a social trap are blackouts during the summer. When it gets really hot, people turn their AC up really high because individually they want to stay cool. But when almost everybody does this and uses more electricity, it can sometimes lead to power outages affecting the group, which in this case is the city. Remember back in 1929 with the stock market crash? Banks used civilian money to invest in stocks. When the stock market crashed, they couldn't pay back the people who gave them money. By pursuing their own self-interest, they caused destruction not only to the civilians that trusted them, but also to America as a whole by drastically damaging its economy. Another great example of a social trap in today's world is climate change. People want energy for cheap for the short term, and they do not want to pay taxes to fund alternative energy sources. This prevents climate change from slowing down and is a loss for the world as a whole.
This short-term gain mentality is especially prevalent in impoverished areas of the world, such as villages in India. People in these villages are worrying about their next meal and their water supply rather than the well-being of their neighbors. The lack of a proper education also feeds this behavior, as they are not properly taught to be mindful of others.
The villagers are supplied water from their local groundwater source. This water is stored in tanks whenever there is electricity available. A valve man supplies this water when there is enough water in the tank. Multiple factors such as these cause the water to be supplied intermittently. The water is supplied to each house, and the villagers manually collect the water once they are aware of it being supplied.
The water is supplied through pipes that stick out of the ground. The problem is that the villagers do not install faucets on these pipes. This causes 10 to 20% of the water to be lost due to villagers not being aware of when it is supplied and the fact that it is lost to the ground when they are not collecting it.
Villagers avoid using faucets because they want to be able to see the water flowing out of the pipe to be aware when it is supplied. Though it should be noted that this could be avoided simply by starting to collect water when the valveman tells them. Doing this as an individual villager does not affect their water supply directly, but as a group, they can lose significant amounts of water.
There have been many protests on this issue of water in rural India. This is another way that their own self-interest causes destruction. They want more water, so they violently protest against their government. While it is partially the government's fault, there is still a lot that the villagers themselves can be doing to make a difference. In some villages, groundwater sources are depleted for months. Wasting water is not an option for these people.
By each rationally pursuing their self-interest rather than the good of the group, they become caught in mutually destructive behavior.
You guessed it. This is a social trap and affects millions in India.
Social traps are a global phenomenon and affect everyone to some extent.
I'm Rohan Mandvi.
And I'm Nick Desmond. And this has been Psych News. Stay mindful. Alright, here's the deal, Alfonso. I know you and Robert stole the diamonds from the diamond shop, and all I need is your confession. Okay, you're staying silent. Well, let me offer you a deal. If you confess right now, I will take 5 years off of your sentence and add it to Robert's. But you better be quick, because just a minute ago I offered Robert the exact same deal. So if you don't answer quick enough, you might be serving an extra 5 years.
This cop doesn't know what he's talking about. Every good criminal knows that the best thing to do in this situation is to not say a word. Well, actually, now that I think about it, Robert isn't a good criminal. I mean, look, we got caught, and he's way too dumb to stay quiet. He'll probably confess any second.
Fine, I did it.
Well, Alfonso, thank you for your confession. And that's a social trap.